and we begin to put fear where it belongs, a God-given response to a perceived threat, but then from there, we put it in the perspective that's healthy, our children will begin to follow suit as well and adapt that. So we model the behavior that we want them to pick up. So as much as fear is contagious, confidence is contagious too. And you get what you lead. And so I know in my family, if something has gone awry, the first place I have to look is at myself. And usually there's an adjustment that has to take place. Right. I think we have to be careful as believers, if we're not afraid and we have peace, that we don't just give pat answers and say, well, you shouldn't be afraid, it's no big deal. Get rid of the mentality that you need to be a perfect parent and be a perfect example. Show them how to grow. Teach them how to learn. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're having a fantastic week. I start off every one of our Facebook live streams that way, but I really do hope you're having a fantastic week. I am joined today by Brittany, my daughter, and our publicist here at Master Books. And today's teaching tip, we're going to talk about fear. Sometimes in homeschooling, or we talk about schooling, we talk about the academics. And as I'm sure if you're an adult with children, you know that life is more than academics. It's more than math and history and science and electives. Life is also about emotional intelligence and social intelligence. It's about staying healthy and eating and all of these things. There's so much more than just 2 + 2 = 4. And I think if you're tuned in at all to the news, to videos, or anything of what's going on right now in the world, especially with the coronavirus, there's a lot of opportunity for fear. And I think it's a good opportunity to help our kids navigate life with challenges that we're going to face. And so what I'm going to talk about is my opinions regarding the topic. I'm sure there are others who are more qualified to speak to the issue, but hopefully there will be some value to it. Let's talk about fear. What is fear? Fear is it's a response to a perceived threat. Sometimes fear is very real, it's very immediate. Sometimes it's just the perception of a threat that we tend to dwell on. God has given us this amazing thing called a fight or flight response that something happens, bang, and we jump. And sometimes, like my family knows, don't scare me, right? Because what happens if you scare me?
He gets this look in his eye, and you know, like, you better get out of there real quick because he's about to kill you.
I don't see anymore. It's my
No, and you see it happening. It's like everything in him just like shuts off, and he just goes into like attack mode.
Yeah, like it's not like I want to. It's just the response that I have if I get scared is to attack. And so I have a fight response if somebody spooks me. Some people will actually just like fall.
That's when I get scared, I just like fall and crumble into a pile on the floor.
Yeah.
It's embarrassing.
And so God has given us this really neat thing where it's meant to protect us, right? If something scares me, my response is there's something that immediately my brain says, you need to respond to this. You don't have time to think. It almost takes over. I don't know what your body does.
I don't know.
It says, eat
I'm
me.
like the fainting goats. If you've ever seen that, whenever they get scared, they just like freeze and then fall over. That's what I do. Literally what I do. And I hate that I do it. I can't help it.
That is. That's funny. Well, fear awakens us to the fact that something may be wrong. And let me go back a little bit today and just say, when it comes to the topic of fear and what's going on in the world, this talk, let's start it with a premise that we are believers, children of God, and as such, we have to approach life differently because we have access We're the king's kids. And as the king's kids, we need to talk about it from his perspective. We want to make sure that we approach the topic from a biblical perspective as believers before we dive too deep into this. But when we're talking about fear, God created us with a fear response. And so with that fear response, it awakens us to take action. Now, what can happen, though, is fear almost can become a bit of a companion, right? We can start being fearful of things that aren't a response, that are perceived as responses as well. What else is amazing about the way we're created? The way that God wired us is that we have what's called mirror neurons in our brain that, and I don't believe that this is an evolutionary trait. I believe God wired it into us, and because we have the same author, we have similarities. But if you've ever seen like a herd of deer or horses, one will get spooked and jump. And before the rest of the herd really even knows what's going on, they've all taken off. And so what happens in that case is our brains are wired in such a way that if I have anger and you walk into a room, you automatically sense something's wrong. There's anger here. If there's fear, the same thing happens. We can respond just because the other person is fearful until, our brain almost takes over and says, something's wrong here. There's fear. There's a reason to be fearful.
Yep.
And that,
Sarah Ashley in the app said, I can't see the video yet. Let us know both on Facebook and in the app if you can see us, if you wouldn't mind.
You can see it on the app too, right? You're on Facebook, not the app.
So many platforms to keep up with.
I see a lot of posts coming in on the app.
Yeah.
Okay, so the
we're good now.
got it. Okay, and also sometimes with fear, there can be other emotions. Like anger is one of the emotions that sometimes can mask fear. So it's not always, but anger typically masks a more sensitive or a more vulnerable emotion. So let's say if you're a married couple and you've asked your husband to take out the trash and the trash is climbing the wall, the house stinks, and the trash hasn't been taken out, and you get angry, not every time, but sometimes that can be that anger can be motivated by the more sensitive emotion of fear, because what that says is we're not going to be healthy and taken care of in our house if trash is climbing the walls and all over the place. And if I'm going to be safe, if I'm going to be provided for, we need to make sure that the conditions we live in are sanitary and free from danger. Leaving garbage in the house and allow it to climb the walls and stink signals danger. And so there's that fear that we're not being provided for and taken care of. And so that anger covers that. And anger is one of those really weird emotions too, because like if you've ever done any work with reactive attachment disorder, or sometimes special needs students, where the world is spiraling out of control or it's moving too fast for them, they can respond with angry outbursts or rages, because when you're angry, the world stops and people take notice and control, things start to settle back down. What's wrong? How do we fix this? Wait a minute, I get the garbage taken out. So just a little background on fear. It's interesting, I was looking at some studies earlier. Fear actually has, it has a scent. And the Army has even done some studies to see if they could create the scent so that they created fear in their enemies. And they've done different things where they take like scent pads in people's armpits and they throw them out of a plane. They don't throw them out of a plane, but they're skydiving.
Right.
And then they'll have people, I'm glad I'm not part of this, sniff the pads and they can relate a little bit
Oh,
to the
like
emotion.
determine what's like stress sweat and what's like normal sweat.
Yeah, there's like pheromones that are released when a person is full of anxiety and stress.
Interesting.
And other people could detect, they couldn't detect the emotion, but they knew that the person who was under stress, they detected that their scent was a little bit more offensive and foul smelling, and there was something there. So just kind of an interesting thing. Fear is contagious. If you've ever been around somebody who's anxious and fearful, it's very easy to fall into their fear and their anxiety. So when I was younger, I spent, for some reason, I just seemed to have a lot of fear. And it was a condition that would almost become paralyzing, like hard to breathe, paralyzing. And I think in so many ways, if I can give a symbolism of, for me, my fears were as present as Brittany was. And I took counsel of my fears, really. And as long as I was fearful, it felt like I was doing something about the situation. So if I was worried about how we were going to make ends meet as a young family, as long as I was worrying about it, I felt like I was doing something about it. And that helped me to feel like I was in control of the situation. The hardest part about that is the brain almost becomes addicted to fear. And then fear becomes this companion that turns on you. Fear is just not a very good friend. It doesn't make a good friend at all. Gratitude seems to make a much better friend. Fear doesn't. And so there came a point where, as goofy as it sounds, I almost had to say to fear that this is a relationship that's unhealthy for me. And God has given me so many commands to not be fearful, that he holds tomorrow, that he's in control of this situation. And his word says that all things work together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. I have no doubt that I love him and I'm called according to his purpose. And so all of these situations over time, I've seen that he's been taking care of me. So in that space, I had to say to this friend or this companion, fear, you know what? This isn't working for me anymore. I'm done. I'm breaking up with you. I'm separating myself from you because this relationship is toxic. If anybody just tuned in, it looks really weird.
Yeah. I'm glad you're using me as an example of your fear.
She's dressed in black and the whole deal today. You fit the part today. You played the part well. Only thing, you could have put like black lines or something under your face.
A little bit of a warning. Next time I'll work it into the outfit.
A little bit more of the Duck Commander thing. So once I did that, then I had to begin working on not re-engaging that relationship, if you will. So one of my heroes is Stonewall Jackson, and one of his quotes was, "Never take counsel of your fears. Your fears will mislead you. Your senses mislead us. They're not dependable. We can be easily deceived. We have confirmation biases. We have different perceptions. We don't see the whole picture." And I've talked about it in the past where God himself is the only one who has the total picture. We don't, right? We live in this box called creation, and God is the one who is outside of all of that, able to see the beginning, the end, the middle, the past, the future. Like, he's present everywhere. And so we can rely on and trust in him. How Stonewall Jackson actually got his name is really interesting. In one of the battles, men were dying and cannons are exploding, horses are going down, and somebody looked up and they saw Stonewall sitting on his horse just stoically in the middle of the battle. And someone said, "Look, there stands Stonewall, or there stands Jackson like a stone wall." And later, as they were surveying the battlefield, somebody mentioned to Jackson, "How can you be so brave?" And he said, "My religious belief teaches me to feel as safe in battle as in bed. God has fixed the time of my death. I do not concern myself with that, but be always ready whenever it may overtake me. That it is the way all men should live, and all men would be equally brave." And when you think about it, our religious belief sets us apart in that we know that God has already fixed the times and the seasons. My length of days has already been numbered, and my responsibility is to live always ready and not fearful. Now, sometimes when I lose sight of the fact that as a child of God, I have the ability to take comfort and rest in him, I tend to start taking on the stresses that I can't even control anyways. And I think we have to continually put him back in the spot where he is God, and we rest in that. Now, I'll give you 3 kind of tips, if you will, that I think we can work with ourselves and in teaching our students. Now, if you've watched any teaching tips, you know one of the things that I say repeatedly is you get what you lead. And so I know in my family, if something has gone awry, the first place I have to look is at myself. And usually there's an adjustment that has to take place. I know when I pastored and led the church, that was absolutely truth. I got what I led. And if I wanted to see change in a certain area, it almost always began with me as the leader. And so as I present these, know that what I'm saying is, if we begin to be confident in situations and we begin to put fear where it belongs, a God-given response to a perceived threat, but then from there, we put it in the perspective that's healthy, our children will begin to follow suit as well and adapt that. So we model the behavior that we want them to pick up. So number 1, I would say, is know who we are as the children of God. He has given us so many promises to not be afraid, that he will uphold us, he will protect us, he will carry us, he will harden us to difficulties. He has given us the capacity for today's troubles, not for tomorrow's troubles, that ultimately in this lifetime, even if it all doesn't go the way we think it should go, we have the eternity to look forward to. So knowing who we are in God and our identity. Now, we've talked a little about this today, but I think about the 12 spies, when the children of Israel had come out of Egypt and they were about to go into the promised land. And as they entered into the promised land, it was unbelievable. It said the land was flowing with milk and honey, and the grape clusters were so big that it took 2 men to carry them. But But out of the 12 spies that went into the land, only 2 of them really remembered the promise that the Lord had said that was their land and he would deliver it to them. And they came back and reported, yes, there are giants there. Yes, there are obstacles and scary things. But God has said he's going to give us the land and that he will be with us and we can take it. Let's go. 10 of them came back and said, oh my goodness, it's too great for us. There's no way we could ever do this. We're small in number compared to them. 10 of them had forgotten who they were, that they were children of Israel, that they had been given a promise, and that they were on a journey that God had called them to. And these are people who were delivered from Egypt, went through the Red Sea, had been provided for and taken care of, and still forgotten that as they faced this new challenge, they forgot who they were and what God had promised them. I think we have to remember who we are as children of God, that he has given to us promises and given to us his Holy Spirit to help us navigate and guide us through that. So number 2 would be the realities of living in a fallen world. I do have, God is working for me. He is working continually to provide for myself and my family. And even one of the things that I was so excited about in this group is when the Lord answered the prayers of healing for Kristen with not having to have a mastectomy. At the beginning, I really felt that it was one of those Mount Carmel moments where we were to pray and ask the Lord to move in power, to demonstrate his power, because we have the opportunity in front of a lot of people and families to ask God to move. And as so many children and families began to intercede and pray, to see God answer that prayer and know that God answers prayer. And we've seen how many miracles that God has done, not just in our family,
Right.
but in other families. There's so much value in that. But sometimes, because God is concerned about our eternity, this present life, and he knows the healing that we need and for a whole experience, because he's going to spend eternity with us. And because we do live in a fallen world where there's suffering and pain and death, we have to embrace the realities that it doesn't always have a happy ending this side of the ultimate happy ending. Mm-hmm. And even in that, even in our pains and our struggling, I think that there is so much opportunity for God to move and do amazing things. And so I think we know who we are. We know that God has given us promise. Fear not, for I am with thee. Do not look around thee and be dismayed. We know Psalm 91. Man, if you're struggling at all with fear, go read Psalm 91 as a family. And just, though 1,000 fall on one side, though 10,000 fall on the other side. I mean, it's just an incredible scripture to begin praying as a family. But coming to grips with the reality of life may be hard, and there may be difficulties, and there may be trials, and there may be tribulations. Now, his scripture says that all things are working together for the good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Good is as he determines it, not as I determine it. But even in our suffering and our pain, we've seen him accomplish good things. So that perspective of there are things in the world that would be easy to be afraid of. There are things happening right now in the headlines that would be very easy to fall into the hysteria. But giving God room to be God and saying we are children of God, and so as children of God, we can expect that God sees us. He's not alarmed by this, and he will carry us. We can't guarantee what the future holds, but we do know that we're going to be able to, regardless of what happens this side of eternity, there will be no more death and no more suffering and no more tears in a very short amount of time. So let me give you a quick tool that, of course, this kind of felt like it was lasted around, but anyways, a very quick tool that I use to help myself in situations where sometimes the anxiety comes out. And can I also say, because we've talked about this today as well, we all handle things differently. Some people don't handle stress the same. Some people get very anxious. Some people, no big deal. They can just roll with the punches easier. I don't think one size fits all, and I think we have to be very sensitive to that. For myself, one of the tricks, and my whole family knows it. In fact, now they joke about it if I get intense. B vitamin, right? A complex B vitamin makes a world of difference. Like if I take a B vitamin, I chill out. It's my chill.
The Snickers commercial, you're not you when you're hungry. It's like, yeah, you're not you without your B vitamin.
Yeah, as soon as I do, I'm not somebody do my chill pill. I don't know what it is about that, but there seems to be a vitamin B deficiency. But when I take a B vitamin, all of a sudden the stress and anxiety I can handle almost anything. But okay, so here's what I would do. I would say if you took a piece of paper when a situation arises, and very simply on one side, what are the facts? Okay? And so we talk about, it's kind of like, my writing is awful, so never mind that. What are the facts? What do we know? So let's say today we know we're talking about a coronavirus where we seem to see a lot of panic. We know it's hard to buy toilet paper in some localities. We know that people are getting sick and that some people are not faring as well if they have compromised immunities. And we know that that some municipalities are doing lockdowns. So these are the facts, not the fear. Don't take counsel of my fear. Just what are the facts that we see? We know that people are saying in younger people it isn't as bad and stuff like that. So just giving a very relevant topic to talk about. Okay, now in light of the facts, let me write down first anything, what am I doing? What am I doing that's not helping? So is there anything right now, in light of the facts in this situation, that I may be doing that's not helping? Here's a good one too. Let me backtrack a little bit. I'm nervous about my kids with their schoolwork. I don't think they're doing enough. I'm concerned that they're falling behind. Well, living in fear of that moment and not actually doing an assessment test and seeing how to get a, let's see where they are, right? So not testing them and just sitting in fear is something that I may be doing that's not helpful. So that would be something I'd write down. This is what I'm doing that's not helping the situation that I'm being presented with. The second question would be, okay, so what can I do to affect the situation positively? So what are the facts? And you can't hardly see. What are the facts? What am I doing that isn't helping? What can I do to affect the situation? And then I can begin to put together a game plan. So in the case of my students needing a test, hey, there's testing options. There's ways to get assessments. There's ways to know if they're learning everything they should be learning. And that's one way that I can face my fear, put together an action plan. You know, here's a perceived threat. My students may be falling behind, but I don't have to continue to live in that space. I don't have to be there. I can start to put together a game plan. It's not helping me to just whine about things or complain about things or ignore things or live in a state of fear. I can actually create an action plan to move through that. So that's a very quick answer. I don't know. Hopefully that helped.
Yeah.
Questions?
Not any questions. Kind of just some feedback. We'll just kind of go through some of the comments on the app. Her handle is sweetgirl8182 said, I'm actually just trusting in God, knowing God is in control. Our lives are in his hands and he gives and takes away. We must be cautious, but not over worry. Maggie said, hello, so glad you're doing this. My local schools are now shutting down and being declared an emergency. Over 12 to 15 cases, so crazy. Pray for me. I'm getting very frustrated this week. It's been a hard week.
Yeah, so there's two different responses. And Brittany is a big fan of the Enneagram. And so she was showing me the Enneagram in relation to salvation, and that we all have different core motivations and core fears, and each personality type has a different core concern or fear, so to speak. That when you're presenting the gospel, if you can identify what personality type they are, they're more receptive to receiving that message.
Right.
I think we have to be careful as believers, if we're not afraid and we have peace, that we don't just give pat answers and say, well, you shouldn't be afraid, it's no big deal. Because the other person, that may not be how they're processing life, and they may see things from a different perspective. From our perspective, we know how that feels, and we can relate that way. And man, when someone can walk confidently, as much as fear is contagious, confidence is contagious too. And the others around you will gain support. Just emotionally, something that we've learned in ministry is you can't discount people for their feelings. Perception is reality. So the way I'm perceiving things right now, the way I perceive this crisis is my reality. And you may not see that in your reality the way I do, but you have to acknowledge the reality before you can help bring comfort to somebody. Does that make sense?
That's really good. Yeah. Tara said, worries like a rocking chair, gives you something to do, but won't get very far.
Yeah, amen.
There weren't like any questions jumping in. Somebody said they were just happy that we weren't doing the live in face masks. Don't want to get y'all sick. On the Facebook Live, the comments, Rebecca said, it's such a vicious cycle. I try my best to stay level-headed for them, being her kids, and it can keep me grounded when I could spiral. I see my oldest has so many of my worry traits, and it makes my heart hurt for her. I've been giving a lot of my worries to the Lord lately, and it has helped, and I hope that I can teach her the same.
Yeah, we were talking also about that I don't know, 10 years ago, I kind of started my own little journey of self-discovery. And some of my kids that have been through that, it also helps because I've been very transparent in that journey. And so they've grown with me. Like there are times that I'm afraid. There are times I overreact or I panic and over respond. And I self-correct in front of them.
Right. Well, I think community is like one of the biggest aspects that helps us grow in our faith. Mm-hmm. Even if it's not like me and my friends, it could just be like me and my family. So him just being open and transparent about like, hey, these are the things I struggle with. This is what I'm working with, but also showing like what he's doing to overcome these things. Like those things help so much. Like you don't even know.
Right.
So yeah, it like challenged the rest of us who watched him kind of find himself and go through this journey to do the same for ourselves.
Yeah, so I think it's healthy when we're like, get rid of the mentality that you need to be a perfect parent and be a perfect example. Show them how to grow. Teach them how to learn. Teach them, like these are unprecedented times. When was the last time every sports organization canceled all their events? I mean, when was the last time entire cities in the world just said, hey, we're in lockdown, stay home? That hasn't happened that in any time recent in my lifetime. So yeah, we don't know what the future holds. We have to though demonstrate confidence that as children of God, we have the ability to be confident and we can trust that God will carry us through the storms. He may take us right through the heart of the storm sometimes. You know, the disciples, he led their ship like right into the heart of the storm, and he's sleeping, he's comfortable because he wasn't concerned, but they were looking at what their senses were telling them. All around us, right. There's waves and wind, and the boat's about to tip. And he was like, why would you be concerned? What's there to be concerned about?
It's the same in like Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you. And everybody like reads that, but it was God that like brought him through so much to get to that point.
Yeah, there's a lot of like.
It's not just, hey, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you. But he brought him through such a struggle and journey to get to that point.
Yeah.
So,
good.
Cool. Well, just a lot of comments, not a lot of questions. Joy said, I'm immune suppressed. I have definitely been fighting back fear, but fear doesn't accomplish anything. I'm staying home as a positive action and thanking God we homeschool. Yeah,
I've talked about this in the past too. And as things begin to play out, personally, I think embracing reality and just saying, okay, how does this look? Worst case scenario. And then, okay, we know that now. What do we know? How can we prevent this? Mm-hmm. And putting things in place. That's something that just helps me.
Yeah, processing through that. And then somebody else had commented earlier that she loved writing it out. That's been one of the biggest things for me to grow. If I'm trying to learn something, to just like process everything out, like physically write it out and to see it. Because some of us also process things visually or auditorily. Yeah. So there's different ways to do that. So to figure out, okay, how do you process things best? So yeah, writing it out helps a lot for me.
Yeah, I did a mind map. Can't see anything, but I did a mind map of the of kind of my thoughts and the way that it sets up and
behind the scenes.
And that helps me organize my thoughts. It helps me then see it. So when I do the task of, okay, what am I doing that isn't helping? What can I do that will be helpful to prepare for it? Mm-hmm. And then we take it one day at a time. That's been real helpful.
And physically seeing it, you kind of see, oh, this isn't as big of an issue as I'm making it out to be. Sometimes, not all the time, but a lot of times for me, it feels like such a bigger issue when it's all just up in your head. But then it's to see it is like, oh, like I'm making a bigger issue out of this than what it actually is.
Right. And then we have to have that awareness that worst case scenario, we win. And life is so short, we all win, right? As believers, if you've accepted Christ, you win. Like it's this lifetime is so fast, and we spend a lot of energy trying to preserve the many moments, but God is looking at it saying, man, it just, like in a clap, you're going to be out of the potty training phase and you're going to be here with me in eternity. And all of that is just part of the process to get us to there. I know oftentimes when I was in pastoral care and I would walk into the room and, you could just feel the overwhelming presence and despair. And I would often say, there's no guarantee I'm going to make it home today. Like I have good friends that didn't make it home from their drive, right? And in that place, like here's always the deal I would tell people I visit the hospital. If you cross over to the other side before I do, wait for me, put in a good word for me. If I make it there before you, and I could very easily do that, I'll make sure to put in a good word for you. But I will definitely, I plan on seeing you there. And let's keep encourage one another in the faith that this life is so short, and though it's going to be filled with trials and tribulations and things, man, the good times are coming. And that's something that we can hold on to and be excited about. And we can train our children to look for that. Sometimes we get so focused in the here and now. What are you going to do next year? How are you going to pay your bills? Who are you going to marry? All of these things that can just be that here and now. But not always think about, man, in a short amount of time.
Yeah, awesome.